The snow fell so thick that Lena Thorne could barely see her own hands stretched out in front of her face as she stumbled through the white darkness, her lungs burning with each ragged breath she dragged into her chest. Behind her, somewhere in the swirling chaos of the blizzard, she could hear them calling her name, their voices twisted with a rage that made her blood run cold even in the freezing December wind that tore at her cloak and dress. Her cousins had finally shown their true nature, and Lena knew with absolute certainty that if they caught her tonight, she would not live to see another sunrise over the Sierra Nevada mountains. It was 1879, and Downeyville, California had been blanketed by an unseasonable storm that the old-timers were already calling the worst they had seen in 20 years. Lena had arrived in town 3 weeks earlier, summoned by a letter from her Uncle Frederick, who claimed he wanted to make amends for years of family disputes and promised her a share of his gold mining operation. She had been foolish enough to believe him, foolish enough to think that family meant something more than greed and violence. The truth had revealed itself tonight when she overheard her 3 cousins, Marcus, Daniel, and Thomas, planning to kill her and forge documents that would give them sole ownership of the claim their father had actually left to Lena in a will she had only discovered hidden in his desk drawer that very afternoon. The wind howled like a living thing as Lena pushed forward, her fingers numb inside her thin gloves, her feet already losing feeling inside her leather boots. She had fled the moment she realized they knew she had found the will, running from the house without even grabbing her heavy coat, wearing only the dark blue dress and cloak she had put on for supper. The temperature had dropped brutally as night fell, and now she was lost somewhere in the wilderness outside town, with no idea which direction would lead her to safety and which would take her deeper into the frozen mountains where she would die of exposure long before morning came. A branch snapped somewhere to her left, and Lena veered right, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She could hear them spreading out, searching for her tracks even though the falling snow was covering them almost as quickly as she made them. They were experienced hunters, her cousins, men who had spent their entire lives in these mountains and knew every trail and hollow. She was a schoolteacher from Sacramento, a city girl who had only seen snow a handful of times in her 22 years. The odds were not in her favor. Her foot caught on something hidden beneath the snow, and Lena went down hard, crying out as pain shot through her ankle and up her leg. She tried to push herself up, but her hands sank into the deep powder and she fell again, this time landing face first in the freezing white. Panic clawed at her throat as she struggled, knowing that every second she spent on the ground was a second her cousins were getting closer. She could taste blood where she had bitten her lip and feel tears freezing on her cheeks as the wind cut through her inadequate clothing like knives. Over there, I saw something move. The shout was close, too close, and Lena forced herself up onto her hands and knees, then to her feet despite the screaming pain in her ankle. She lurched forward into the blizzard, no longer caring about direction or destination, driven only by the pure animal instinct to survive. Her vision was blurring, whether from tears or snow or the early stages of freezing to death, she could not tell. She tried to run, but her injured ankle would barely support her weight, and she was reduced to a stumbling half-walk that she knew would not be fast enough. The ground suddenly disappeared beneath her feet, and Lena found herself sliding down a steep embankment, unable to stop herself, branches and rocks tearing at her dress and skin as she tumbled through the darkness. She hit the bottom with a force that knocked the air from her lungs and left her gasping and dizzy, sprawled in what felt like a small ravine or dried creek bed. Above her, she could hear shouting as her cousins reached the spot where she had fallen, but their voices sounded more distant now, confused about which direction she had gone. Lena tried to move and discovered that she could not. Her entire body felt heavy and disconnected, and a dangerous warmth was beginning to spread through her limbs that some dim part of her mind recognized as the first stage of freezing to death. She thought of her mother, dead these past 5 years, and her father who had passed when she was only 16, leaving her alone in the world except for the uncle she had never met who had turned out to be as corrupt as his sons. She thought of the students she taught, their bright faces and eager questions, and felt a deep sadness that she would never see them again, never finish reading them the adventure stories they loved so much. The sound of a horse moving through snow reached her ears, but seemed to come from very far away. Lena tried to call out, but her voice emerged as barely a whisper, lost immediately in the wind. She was so cold now that the pain had faded into numbness, and she found herself thinking that perhaps freezing to death was not such a terrible way to go after all. It was rather like falling asleep, like drifting away on a cloud of white softness that held no more fear or struggle. Strong hands gripped her shoulders, and Lena's eyes flew open though she had not realized they had closed. A face loomed above her, barely visible in the darkness and snow, but she could make out a wide-brimmed hat and the gleam of eyes that seemed to catch what little light existed in the stormy night. The man was saying something, but the wind stole his words away before they could reach her. He bent closer, and this time she heard him clearly. "Can you stand? We need to get you out of this storm." Lena tried to answer, but her jaw was locked with cold and she could only make a small sound in her throat. The man seemed to understand because he nodded, and in one smooth motion lifted her into his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. She felt herself being placed on a horse, felt the man swing up behind her and wrap something warm and heavy around her shoulders, felt the animal begin to move through the snow with steady, sure-footed steps that spoke of experience with mountain terrain. "My cousins," she managed to force out through chattering teeth. "They are hunting me." The man's arm tightened around her waist, holding her secure against his chest. "I know. I heard them shouting and figured anyone running in this storm must have good reason. We will be at my cabin in 10 minutes. You are safe now. Stop running." Those words, spoken in a deep, calm voice that somehow cut through both the storm and her panic, released something inside Lena that she had been holding tight since the moment she fled her uncle's house. She sagged against the stranger's chest and let herself believe, just for a moment, that perhaps she truly was safe, that perhaps she would survive this night after all. The warmth of his body behind her and the heavy coat he had wrapped around her were beginning to penetrate the frozen shell she had become, and with the warmth came pain as her extremities started to thaw. She bit back a whimper, and the man must have felt her tense because his voice came again, close to her ear. "I know it hurts. That is good, though. It means you are not too far gone. My name is Warren Jameson. I work a small ranch about 2 miles outside Downeyville, up in a hollow where most folks do not venture. Your cousins will not find us there." "How do you know about my cousins?" Lena asked, forcing the words out past lips that felt swollen and clumsy. "Small town," Warren said simply. "Everyone knows Frederick Thorne's sons have been in a foul mood since their pretty cousin arrived from Sacramento. I have been in town enough to hear the talk, and I have seen how they watch you when you walk to the general store or the church. I did not like the look of it." Lena absorbed this information as the horse continued its steady pace through the blizzard. She had been so focused on settling into her new life in Downeyville, on learning about her uncle's mining operation, and trying to build some kind of relationship with her new family, that she had not paid attention to how things might appear to outsiders. She had noticed the way her cousins stared at her sometimes, but she had attributed it to curiosity about the city relative they had never met. She had been blind to the danger until it was almost too late. The horse began to climb, and Lena felt the wind lessen slightly as they entered more sheltered terrain. Through the swirling snow, she could make out the darker shapes of trees and rock formations. And then suddenly, there was a structure looming in front of them. A solid cabin built into the side of the mountain with a small barn attached. Warren guided the horse directly into the barn and dismounted, then reached up to lift Lena down with the same easy strength he had shown earlier. Her legs buckled when her feet touched the ground, and he caught her smoothly, lifting her back into his arms. "I have got you," he said quietly. "Let us get you inside and warmed up properly." He carried her through a connecting door that led directly from the barn into the cabin, and Lena found herself in a single large room that was blessedly warm from a fire burning in a stone fireplace. Warren set her down in a chair near the hearth and immediately began piling more wood on the flames, building the fire up until heat radiated in waves that made Lena gasp as her frozen skin began to truly thaw. The pain was intense, a burning, aching sensation that spread through her hands and feet and face, but she welcomed it because it meant she was alive. She had survived. Warren disappeared into what appeared to be a small back room and returned with an armful of blankets and what looked like men's clothing. He set them on the chair next to Lena and then turned his back, busying himself at a cast iron stove in the corner of the room. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said without turning around. "Everything you are wearing is soaked through, and you will not warm up properly until you are dry. I have left some of my things there for you. They will be too big, but they are clean and warm. I will make coffee and keep my back turned until you tell me you are decent." Lena looked down at herself and realized he was right. Her dress and cloak were soaked through with snow and ice. Her stockings were torn and bloody from her fall down the embankment, and she was dripping water all over the wooden floor. Her fingers were still clumsy and numb, but she managed to unfasten her cloak and let it fall to the floor, then began working on the buttons of her dress. It took far longer than it should have because her hands would not cooperate properly, but finally, she managed to strip off the wet garments and pull on the shirt and trousers Warren had left for her. They were indeed far too large, but they were made of warm flannel and wool and were completely dry. She wrapped herself in 2 of the blankets and tucked her feet under her, trying to restore circulation. "I am dressed," she said, and Warren turned around with 2 tin cups of coffee in his hands. He brought one to her, and Lena wrapped her hands around it gratefully, letting the heat seep into her palms before taking a careful sip. The coffee was strong and bitter and absolutely perfect. For the first time, with light from the fire and the oil lamps Warren had lit, Lena got a good look at the man who had saved her life. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly over the collar of his shirt and eyes that were a striking gray-green color like sage in shadow. His face was weathered from outdoor work but handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily, though at the moment his expression was serious and concerned. He was tall and broad-shouldered, built like a man who made his living through physical labor, and he moved with an easy confidence that spoke of competence and self-reliance. "Thank you," Lena said, meeting his eyes. "You saved my life. If you had not found me, I would have died out there in the snow." Warren settled into a chair across from her, cradling his own cup of coffee. "What are you running from exactly? I heard enough to know your cousins are after you, but not why." Lena hesitated, then decided that this man had earned the truth. She told him everything, starting with the letter from her uncle and ending with the discovery of the will and the overheard conversation about her imminent murder. Warren listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as she spoke. "You still have this will?" he asked when she finished. Lena's heart sank. "No, I left it on the desk where I found it when I ran. I did not think to grab it. They have probably destroyed it by now." "Maybe," Warren said slowly. "Or maybe they kept it, thinking they would need to forge a new version that favored them instead. Either way, you cannot go back there. They have shown their hand and they will not hesitate to finish what they started. You are a threat to their inheritance as long as you are alive." "But what can I do?" Lena asked, hearing the desperation in her own voice. "I have no money except what little I brought with me, no family who would help me, nowhere to go. If I try to leave town, they will find me. If I go to the law, it is my word against theirs, and I am the outsider while they have lived here their whole lives." Warren was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup as if looking for answers in its dark depths. When he looked up, his expression was determined. "You stay here," he said. "This storm is going to last at least another day, maybe two based on how the sky looked before it got full dark. No one is going anywhere until it clears. That gives us time to figure out a plan. Your cousins do not know about this place, and even if they did, they could not find it in this weather. You are safe here." "I cannot ask you to harbor me," Lena protested. "If they find out you helped me, they might come after you too." A hint of a smile crossed Warren's face, the first she had seen from him. "I have dealt with worse than the Thorne boys. Besides, I did not much like your uncle, and I like his sons even less. Frederick Thorne tried to run me off this land 2 years ago, claimed he had a prior claim to the mineral rights. He did not, and I had the papers to prove it, but he made my life difficult for a good 6 months before the territorial judge ruled in my favor. Frederick was the kind of man who thought wealth and family name gave him the right to do whatever he wanted. Sounds like his sons inherited more than just his mine." Lena felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. She was still in terrible danger, and her situation was far from resolved, but for the first time since she had overheard her cousins plotting her death, she felt like perhaps she was not completely alone and helpless. This stranger, this cowboy rancher named Warren Jameson, was willing to help her for no reason other than that it was the right thing to do. In her experience, such men were rare. "I do not even know how to begin to thank you," she said softly. Warren shook his head. "No thanks needed. Now drink your coffee and warm up. You can take my bed tonight and I will sleep out here by the fire. Tomorrow we will see what the storm looks like and make our plans from there." "I cannot take your bed," Lena argued, but Warren was already standing and moving toward the back room. "Yes, you can and you will," he said firmly. "You have been half frozen and you need proper rest. I have slept on worse than a floor in front of a warm fire. No arguments." He returned with more blankets and a pillow, and proceeded to make himself a pallet on the floor near the hearth while Lena watched, too tired to protest further. When he was satisfied with his arrangements, he gestured toward the back room. "Go on. There is water in the pitcher if you need it, and extra blankets in the chest at the foot of the bed. The door has a latch if it will make you feel safer." Lena stood, still wrapped in her cocoon of blankets, and made her way to the back room. It was small but clean, with a simple rope bed covered in quilts, a dresser, a washstand, and a wooden chest. She closed the door and latched it, then crawled into the bed fully clothed in Warren's borrowed garments. The sheets smelled like pine and leather and the outdoors, masculine scents that should have made her uncomfortable, but instead made her feel strangely secure. She lay in the darkness listening to the wind howl around the cabin and the crackling of the fire in the other room, And despite everything that had happened, despite the danger she was still in, she felt safe. Warren Jameson was a stranger, a man she had met only an hour ago, but something in her recognized him as someone trustworthy, someone honorable. She did not understand it, this instant sense of connection and safety, but she was too exhausted to analyze it. Sleep pulled at her with insistent hands, and Lena let herself sink into it. Her last conscious thought a memory of Warren's voice saying those 4 simple words that had changed everything. "You are safe now." She woke to pale gray light filtering through the single window and the smell of bacon frying. For a moment, Lena was disoriented, unsure where she was or how she had gotten there, and then memory returned in a rush that made her sit up abruptly in bed. The blizzard. Her cousins. Warren Jameson pulling her from the snow and bringing her to safety. She swung her legs out of bed and winced as pain shot through her injured ankle. Looking down, she saw that it was swollen and bruised, purple and black marks spreading across the skin. A soft knock came at the door. "You awake in there?" Warren's voice called. "I have breakfast if you are hungry." "Yes, I am awake," Lena called back. "I will be out in a moment." She used the water in the pitcher to wash her face and hands, then attempted to do something with her hair which had come loose from its pins during her flight through the storm, and now hung in a tangled mess down her back. She managed to braid it into a simple plait, using her fingers as a comb, then opened the door and limped out into the main room. Warren was dishing eggs and bacon onto 2 tin plates at the small table near the stove. He glanced up as she entered, and his eyes immediately went to her limping gait. "You hurt your ankle," he said, and it was not a question. "Sit down and let me look at it after you eat." They sat across from each other at the table and ate in companionable silence. The food was simple but good, and Lena realized she had not eaten since lunch the previous day. She cleaned her plate and accepted a second cup of coffee, this one with a precious spoonful of sugar stirred in. "The storm is still going strong," Warren said, nodding toward the window where snow could be seen falling just as thick as it had the night before. "We are not going anywhere today." "How is the ankle feeling?" "It hurts," Lena admitted, "but I can walk on it. Let me see it anyway." Lena hesitated, then pulled her foot up onto the edge of her chair and rolled up the cuff of the 2 long trousers. Warren knelt beside her chair and gently probed the swollen flesh, his hands careful and sure. Lena tried not to react to the pain or to the strange flutter in her stomach at having this man touch her so intimately, even if it was in a purely medical capacity. "It is not broken," Warren said after a moment. "Badly sprained, though. You need to stay off it as much as possible for the next few days and keep it elevated when you can. I have some willow bark tea that will help with the pain and swelling." He stood and moved to a shelf where various jars and tins were arranged. Lena watched him measure dried bark into a pot and add water, then set it on the stove to steep. He moved around the cabin with efficient purposefulness, a man completely comfortable in his own space and his own skin. Lena found herself noticing small details about him. The way his hair curled at his temples, the breadth of his shoulders, the long fingers that handled everything with casual competence. She told herself sternly that now was not the time to be noticing such things, that she had far more pressing concerns than the attractiveness of her rescuer. But her traitorous eyes kept drifting back to him anyway. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, as much to distract herself as out of genuine curiosity. "You said you work a small operation. What exactly does that mean?" Warren brought her a cup of the willow bark tea and she sipped it cautiously. It was bitter but not unpleasant, with an earthy taste that reminded her of the forest floor after rain. "I have about 200 acres here in the hollow," he said, settling back into his chair. I run a small herd of cattle, maybe 60 head, and I have a dozen horses that I breed and train. It is not a big operation, but it supports me well enough. I came out here from Missouri 5 years ago after my father died and left me enough money to buy this land and stock it. I was 20 years old and full of ideas about making my fortune in California. I did not find gold like so many men dream of, but I found something better. I found a place that feels like home, work that I love, and the kind of freedom you cannot buy with all the gold in the world. There was something in the way he spoke, a quiet passion and satisfaction that resonated deeply with Lena. She had felt that same sense of purpose about her teaching, that feeling of having found the thing she was meant to do with her life. It created an unexpected point of connection between them, this shared understanding of what it meant to build a life around work that mattered. "I am a teacher," she found herself saying. "Or at least I was back in Sacramento. I taught at a school for children ages 6 through 12. I loved it. I loved seeing their faces light up when they finally understood something they had been struggling with. Loved reading to them and watching their imaginations come alive with the stories. I loved feeling like I was making a difference in their lives, giving them tools they would carry forward into their futures." "Why did you leave?" Warren asked. "If you loved it so much, why come to Downeyville when your uncle wrote?" Lena wrapped her hands around her teacup, gathering her thoughts. "Money," she said simply. "My parents left me nothing when they died. My father was a clerk who drank away most of what he earned, and after he passed, my mother and I scraped by on what I could make taking in sewing and laundry while I finished my own schooling. When she died, I was alone and had to support myself entirely. Teaching pays very little, barely enough to cover room and board with nothing left over for any kind of security. When my uncle's letter arrived promising me a share in a profitable gold mine, promising me family and financial stability, I thought it was the answer to my prayers. I thought perhaps I could build a real life here, maybe even continue teaching if Downeyville had a school that needed a teacher." "We do have a school," Warren said. "Miss Henderson runs it in a building next to the church. She is getting on in years, though, and I know she has talked about wanting to retire. She has been looking for someone to take over but has not had much luck finding anyone willing to come to such a small mountain town." Lena felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. "If I survive this situation with my cousins, maybe I could talk to her. Though I suppose I would need somewhere to live, and I have no money to rent a room until I could earn wages." "One problem at a time," Warren said gently. "First we keep you alive and figure out what to do about your cousins and the matter of your uncle's will. Then we worry about the rest." They spent the remainder of the morning talking, the conversation flowing easily in a way that surprised them both. Warren told her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, about the hard years after his mother died when he was 12, and he and his father struggled to keep the farm running. He told her about the decision to sell after his father's death and head west, about the journey across the plains and over the mountains, about the first time he saw this hollow and knew with absolute certainty that this was where he was meant to be. Lena told him about her childhood in Sacramento, about her mother's gentle kindness and her father's slow descent into alcoholism, about the shame of poverty and the determination to make something better of herself through education. She told him about her students, describing their individual personalities with such warmth and detail that Warren felt he could almost see them. She told him about the loneliness of being young and alone in the world, about the ache of having no family and no real home to call her own. By the time afternoon arrived and Warren went out to tend to his animals in the barn, they had moved past the awkwardness of strangers and into something that felt startlingly like friendship. Lena sat by the fire with her injured ankle propped on a stool, mending a tear in Warren's shirt that she had noticed hanging on a peg, and thought about how strange it was that she felt more comfortable in this isolated cabin with a man she barely knew than she had in her uncle's large house, surrounded by her own blood relatives. The storm continued through that day and into the next, the wind howling around the cabin like a pack of wolves while snow piled up in drifts that reached halfway to the windows. Warren kept the fire burning and the coffee hot, and cooked simple meals that they shared at the small table while outside the world disappeared into white. They talked and were silent in turns, both comfortable with conversation and with quiet. Warren carved a piece of wood by the fire, his knife moving in smooth, practiced strokes, while Lena read aloud from the only book in the cabin, a battered copy of Shakespeare's plays that had belonged to Warren's mother. On the second night, as they sat by the fire after supper, Warren asked the question Lena had been expecting. "What do you want to do? When the storm clears and we can leave here, what is your plan?" Lena set down the shirt she was mending and looked into the flames. "I do not know," she admitted. "Everything I want seems impossible. I want to claim what my uncle left me, but I have no proof now that the will existed. I want to see my cousins brought to justice for what they planned to do to me, but I have no evidence and no witnesses. I want to stay in Downeyville and build a life here, but I have no money and nowhere safe to live. Every path forward seems blocked." Warren was quiet for a long moment, his hand still on the piece of wood he had been carving. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "There might be a way. It is not perfect and it might not work, but it is better than nothing. If you are willing to trust me, I have an idea." Lena turned to look at him, her heart beating faster. "Tell me." "We get married," Warren said simply, and Lena felt the world tilt sideways. "Before you say no, hear me out. If you are my wife, you are under my protection. Your cousins cannot touch you without answering to me, and they know that, unlike you, I am not alone and helpless. I have friends in town, other ranchers and miners who respect me and would back me up if it came to trouble. As my wife, you would have a home here and the security of knowing you are not facing this alone. And when we go to the law about your uncle's will and what your cousins tried to do, you would have a husband supporting your story. It would not just be the word of a young woman against 3 men. It would be the word of a married couple with ties to the community." Lena stared at him, speechless. Of all the things she had expected him to say, a proposal of marriage had not even entered her mind as a possibility. "I cannot ask you to do that," she finally managed. "To tie yourself to me, a stranger, just to protect me from my family. It is too much. You would be giving up your freedom, your chance to marry someone you actually care about. I cannot let you make that sacrifice." Warren set down his carving and turned to face her fully. His gray-green eyes were serious but calm, and when he spoke there was no hesitation in his voice. "You would not be asking. I am offering, and maybe I am not sacrificing as much as you think. The truth is, Lena, I like you. These past 2 days talking with you have been some of the best I have spent in a long while. You are smart and funny and kind, and you have more courage than you give yourself credit for. I think we could make a good partnership, you and I. I am not promising you a love match like something out of those Shakespeare plays you have been reading to me, but I am promising you respect and protection and a real home. That is more than nothing." Lena felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. "Why would you do this for me? You do not even know me." "I know enough," Warren said. "I know you love teaching children, and I know you value honesty. I know you are brave enough to run into a blizzard rather than stay and be murdered. I know you are practical enough to recognize a good solution when you hear one. And I know that, when you read those plays by the fire last night, You gave each character a different voice and made me laugh at Falstaff's drunken speeches. That is not nothing. That is more than I knew about some folks I have known for years." Lena looked at this man who had saved her life, who was now offering her his name and his protection, and felt something shift inside her chest. It was not love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that could become love given time and care. She thought about the alternative, about trying to face her cousins alone, about leaving Downieville and starting over in yet another place where she knew no one and had nothing. She thought about the teaching position that might be available, about the possibility of having a real home for the first time since her mother died. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "I want you to know that I will try to be a good wife to you. I can cook and keep house, and I am not afraid of hard work. I will not be a burden to you, and I will try to make this a real marriage, not just a legal arrangement. You deserve that much at least." Something in Warren's expression softened. "Then we have an understanding. When the storm clears, we will ride into town and find the preacher. We will get married quickly and quietly, and then we will go to the law and tell them everything about what your cousins tried to do. With you as my wife, they will have to take the accusation seriously. And if your cousins try anything, they will have to go through me first." They sat in silence for a while, both absorbing the enormity of what they had just agreed to. Lena felt a strange mixture of fear and relief, and something else she could not quite name. Her entire life was about to change again, but this time it felt like perhaps the change might be for the better. The storm finally broke on the third morning, the wind dying down and the snow tapering off to occasional flurries. The sun came out for the first time in days, turning the world into a glittering white expanse that was almost painful to look at in its brightness. Warren went out to check on the animals and clear paths through the deep snow while Lena tidied the cabin and tried not to think too hard about what was going to happen later that day. They left the ranch at mid-morning, Warren on his big bay gelding and Lena riding a gentle mare. The journey into Downieville took over an hour because the snow was deep, and they had to pick their way carefully along the trail. Lena had changed back into her own dress, which Warren had dried and mended as best he could, and she wore his heavy coat over it because her cloak had been damaged beyond easy repair. She felt strange riding into town at Warren's side, knowing that by the end of the day she would be his wife, knowing that her cousins were probably frantic with wondering what had become of her. The town was quiet, most people still digging out from the storm, but the church stood solid and welcoming with smoke rising from the chimney of the small house next to it where the preacher lived. Warren helped Lena down from her horse, and they walked together to the door. Reverend Thomas answered Warren's knock, his eyebrows rising in surprise when he saw them standing there together. "Warren Jameson, this is a surprise. And Miss Thorne, is it not? Everyone has been wondering where you have been these past few days. Your cousins have been quite worried about you." "I am sure they have," Lena said dryly. "Reverend Thomas Warren and I have come to ask you to marry us." The preacher's eyebrows climbed even higher. "Marry you, today, but there has been no announcement, no courtship that anyone has observed. This is highly irregular." "Nevertheless, it is what we want," Warren said firmly. "Miss Thorne has agreed to be my wife, and we see no reason to wait. We are both of age and of sound mind. Will you perform the ceremony, or must we ride to the next town and find someone who will?" Reverend Thomas looked between them, clearly confused but also clearly recognizing something in their expressions that made him hesitate to refuse outright. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately. Miss Thorne, if I could speak with you alone for a moment." Lena glanced at Warren, who nodded slightly. She followed the preacher into his small study, leaving Warren standing in the entryway. Reverend Thomas closed the door and turned to her with concern written all over his face. "My dear, I must ask if you are being coerced in any way. Warren Jameson is a good man as far as I know, but this is all very sudden. If you are in some kind of trouble, there are other ways to handle it besides rushing into marriage." Lena took a deep breath. "Reverend, I am in trouble, but not the kind you are thinking. Warren is helping me, not hurting me. My cousins tried to kill me 3 nights ago. I overheard them planning my murder so they could steal my inheritance. I ran into the blizzard and Warren found me and saved my life. He has offered me his protection and his name, and I have accepted. I know it seems sudden, but I assure you I am doing this of my own free will. Warren Jameson is the best man I have ever met, and I count myself lucky that he is willing to marry me." The preacher's face had gone pale. "Your cousins tried to kill you. This is a serious accusation. Have you gone to the sheriff?" "Not yet. I wanted to be Warren's wife first, so that I would have someone standing beside me when I made my accusations. The Thornes are a powerful family in this town, and I am just a girl from Sacramento that no one knows. I need Warren's support and his name if I am going to have any chance of being believed and seeing justice done." Reverend Thomas studied her face for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "I believe you, and you are right that the Thornes have influence here. Very well. If you are certain this is what you want, I will perform the ceremony. But know that marriage is not something to be entered into lightly, even under difficult circumstances. Once you speak those vows, you will be bound together in the eyes of God and man." "I understand," Lena said quietly. "And I am certain." They returned to the entryway where Warren waited, and the preacher gathered his prayer book and a Bible. The ceremony was simple and quick, performed in the small church with only the preacher's wife pulled in to serve as a witness. Lena stood beside Warren in front of the altar and repeated words that millions of women had spoken before her, promising to love and honor and cherish this man she had known for only 3 days. When Warren slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, one that had belonged to his mother, Lena felt the weight of it like an anchor, like something solid to hold onto in the storm of her life. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Thomas said, and Warren turned to Lena with a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, and he leaned down to brush his lips across hers in a kiss that was brief and chaste but sent a shiver through her nonetheless. "I will protect you," he murmured against her ear, too quietly for the others to hear. "I promise." They signed the marriage register and accepted the preacher's somewhat bemused congratulations, and then they were walking back out into the snowy street, Lena now bearing the name Lena Jameson and all the protection and complication that came with it. "Ready to go see the sheriff?" Warren asked, and Lena squared her shoulders and nodded. The sheriff's office was a small building near the main street, and Sheriff Donovan looked up from his desk when they entered, his weathered face registering surprise. "Warren Jameson, what brings you into town? And Miss Thorne, I am glad to see you safe. Your cousins have been turning the town upside down looking for you since the storm started." "It is Mrs. Jameson now," Warren said, and Lena felt a flutter of pleasure at hearing him claim her as his wife. "We just came from getting married at the church. And we are here because Lena has something to tell you about why she disappeared during the storm." Sheriff Donovan leaned back in his chair, his expression growing more serious. "I am listening." Lena told her story again, starting with her arrival in Downeyville and ending with her flight into the blizzard. She left nothing out, describing in detail what she had overheard her cousins planning and the discovery of her uncle's will. When she finished, the sheriff sat in silence for a long moment, his fingers drumming on his desk. "These are serious accusations," he finally said. Attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud. Do you have any proof beyond your word? The will was real, Lena said. I saw it with my own eyes. My uncle left me his gold mine and the house. I do not know if my cousins destroyed it or if they kept it planning to forge something else, but it existed. And I know what I heard them say. They were going to kill me and make it look like an accident. Why would Frederick Thorne leave everything to you when he had 3 sons of his own? The sheriff asked, and Lena could hear the skepticism in his voice. I do not know, Lena admitted. I never met my uncle before I came here. Maybe he felt guilty about the years of estrangement from my mother, his sister. Maybe he thought his sons were not fit to inherit. I cannot speak to his reasoning, only to what I saw written in his will. Sheriff Donovan turned his attention to Warren. And you, Warren. What is your part in all this? I found Lena half frozen in the snow during the storm, Warren said calmly. I brought her to my ranch and gave her shelter. When she told me what had happened, I believed her. I have offered her my protection and my name. If the Thorne boys have a problem with that, they can come talk to me about it. The sheriff rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. I will need to talk to the Thorne brothers, hear their side of things. If this will exists, I will need to see it. In the meantime, Mrs. Jameson, I advise you to stay close to your new husband. If there is any truth to what you are saying, you are still in danger. I have no intention of letting her out of my sight, Warren said firmly. We will be staying at the Grand Hotel tonight before heading back to my ranch tomorrow. If you need to reach us, that is where we will be. They left the sheriff's office and walked to the hotel, Lena acutely aware of the curious stares they were attracting. By tomorrow, everyone in Downeyville would know that Frederick Thorne's niece had married Warren Jameson and made shocking accusations against her cousins. She could only hope that the truth would be enough to protect her from whatever retribution Marcus, Daniel, and Thomas might be planning. Warren booked them a room, and they climbed the stairs in silence. Once inside with the door closed, some of the tension drained from Lena's shoulders. She sank into the single chair by the window while Warren checked the door lock, and then turned to face her. That went as well as could be expected, he said. The sheriff will investigate, and even if he does not find the will, word is out now about what your cousins tried to do. They will have to be careful how they act from now on. They cannot just make you disappear without everyone knowing who was responsible. Do you think they will come after me anyway? Lena asked quietly. After you. Warren moved to crouch in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. They might try. But I can handle myself, and I will not let them hurt you. I meant what I said in front of the preacher. I will protect you, Lena. You are my wife now, and that means something to me. Lena looked into his eyes and saw nothing but honesty there, nothing but steadfast determination. On impulse, she reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. He went very still, his eyes darkening, and she felt the air between them change and thicken. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for saving me, for believing me, for marrying me. I know this is not what you expected when you woke up 3 days ago, but I am grateful beyond words that you found me in that storm. Warren turned his head to press a kiss into her palm, and Lena felt heat bloom in her chest and spread through her body. This man was her husband now, this good, strong, honorable man who had asked for nothing in return for turning his life upside down to help her. She found herself wanting to close the distance between them, wanting to kiss him properly, instead of the chaste brush of lips they had shared in the church. But before she could act on the impulse, Warren stood and moved away, putting space between them. You should rest, he said, and his voice was rougher than usual. It has been a long day and you are still recovering from your ordeal. I will sleep in the chair tonight. You take the bed. Lena wanted to protest, wanted to tell him they were married now and could share the bed without impropriety. but she could see from his expression that he was trying to be honorable, trying to give her time and space to adjust to their new reality. So she simply nodded and stood, moving to the bed while Warren settled into the chair with a blanket. She lay awake for a long time, listening to his breathing slowly even out as he fell asleep, and wondering what their future would look like. This stranger who was now her husband, and who she was beginning to realize she might be able to love. Morning brought a knock at their door that made them both startle awake. Warren answered it to find Sheriff Donovan standing in the hallway, his expression grim. "You had better come with me," the sheriff said. "Both of you. We found something you need to see." They followed him through the morning streets to a small office building that housed the Territorial Land Office. Inside, a nervous-looking clerk gestured them toward a back room where several documents were spread on a table. Sheriff Donovan pointed to one of them. "Is this the will you were talking about?" he asked Lena. She moved closer and felt her heart leap. It was. It was the exact document she had found in her uncle's desk, right down to the coffee stain in the corner and the precise wording that left everything to "my niece, Lena Thorne, daughter of my beloved sister Mary." "Where did you find this?" she breathed. "Hidden in Marcus Thorne's room at the boarding house where he lives," the sheriff said. "When I went to question the brothers this morning about your accusations, Marcus got jumpy. Too jumpy. I got a warrant to search his room and found this tucked in a Bible on his shelf. Apparently he could not bring himself to destroy his father's last will and testament, but he did not want anyone finding it either." "What does this mean?" Warren asked. "It means Mrs. Jameson here is telling the truth. It means Frederick Thorne left his entire estate to his niece, and it means his sons have been unlawfully occupying property that does not belong to them. It also means I am going to be arresting all 3 Thorne boys on charges of conspiracy to commit murder and fraud." Lena felt tears spring to her eyes and did not try to stop them. "They will really be arrested. They will face justice for what they tried to do. They will," Sheriff Donovan confirmed. "And you, Mrs. Jameson, are now the owner of one of the more profitable gold mines in these mountains. Congratulations." The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal proceedings and paperwork. Marcus, Daniel, and Thomas Thorne were arrested and held for trial. The mine and the house were legally transferred to Lena's name. She and Warren moved some of her belongings from her uncle's house to the ranch, and Lena began the strange process of settling into her new life as a married woman and a property owner. The scandal was the talk of Downeyville for weeks, but Lena found that she did not care what people said about her. She had Warren by her side, solid and steady, and she had justice for what had almost been done to her. The Thorne brothers would face a judge and jury for their crimes, and whether they ended up in prison or simply run out of town, they would not be a threat to her anymore. Lena also went to visit Miss Henderson at the school, and the older woman was thrilled to learn that there was a qualified teacher willing to take over her position. They agreed that Lena would begin teaching when the spring term started, and Miss Henderson would stay on for a few months to help with the transition before officially retiring. Through all of this, Lena and Warren orbited each other carefully, 2 people learning the steps of a dance they had started without any practice. They shared the cabin now, Warren having insisted that Lena take the bedroom while he continued to sleep on a pallet by the fire. They cooked and ate meals together, worked side by side on ranch chores, talked late into the evening about everything and nothing. They were building a life together piece by careful piece, and with each passing day, Lena felt her initial gratitude and respect for Warren deepening into something warmer, something that made her heart skip when he smiled at her, or made her skin tingle when their hands accidentally touched. She thought Warren might be feeling something similar based on the way she sometimes caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. But he maintained a careful distance and never pressed for anything more than companionship. It was both frustrating and endearing, this determination of his to be a gentleman, to give her space and time and choice. One evening about 6 weeks after their wedding, they were sitting by the fire after supper, when Lena finally decided she had had enough of dancing around the growing attraction between them. She set down the sewing she had been working on and moved to sit beside Warren on his pallet instead of in her chair across from him. He looked up in surprise, the piece of leather he had been working into a bridle strap falling forgotten into his lap. "Lena, I need to tell you something," she said, her heart hammering. "These past weeks with you have been some of the best of my life. I know we married for practical reasons, for protection and security, but Warren, I want you to know that I do not regret it for a moment. You have been kind and patient and good to me, and I have come to care for you deeply. What I am trying to say is that I would like this to be a real marriage in every sense of the word, if you want that too." Warren stared at her, his gray-green eyes wide, and then slowly a smile spread across his face that transformed his whole expression into something radiant. "I want that too," he said, his voice low and warm. "I have wanted that almost from the first night when you read Shakespeare by the firelight and made me see the characters as if they were real people in the room with us. I did not want to rush you or make you feel obligated, but Lena, I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have been falling since I pulled you out of that snow, and you looked at me like I was something heroic, instead of just a man doing what any decent person would do." Lena felt joy bubble up in her chest like champagne. "You are heroic, though," she said softly. "You saved my life, and then you changed it completely. You gave me safety and a home and a future I never dreamed possible. How could I not fall in love with you?" Warren cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she had not realized were falling. "May I kiss you properly now? Not like in the church, but like a man kisses his wife when he loves her and wants to show her how much she means to him." "Please," Lena whispered, and then his mouth was on hers, and she was lost in the heat and sweetness of it. This kiss was nothing like the brief, chaste touch they had shared at their wedding. This was deep and searching, and full of all the longing they had both been holding back for weeks. Lena wound her arms around Warren's neck and kissed him back with all the passion she had been afraid to show. And when they finally broke apart, they were both breathless and smiling. They made love that night on the pallet by the fire, with the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls and the winter wind singing around the eaves. Warren was gentle and careful, attentive to Lena's responses, making sure she felt cherished and safe even as they explored this new, intimate dimension of their relationship. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, Lena's head on Warren's chest listening to the steady beat of his heart, and she thought that she had never felt so completely content in her entire life. The winter gave way to spring, and with the changing season came Lena's first day as the new schoolteacher of Downieville. She threw herself into the work with enthusiasm, and Warren supported her completely, making sure she had everything she needed and never complaining about the evenings she spent grading papers or preparing lessons. He seemed to take pride in her accomplishments, telling anyone who would listen about how the children adored her and how much they were learning under her instruction. The trial of the Thorne brothers took place in April, and both Lena and Warren testified about what had happened the night of the blizzard. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Marcus, Daniel, and Thomas were sentenced to 15 years each in the territorial prison, and Lena felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had not fully realized she had been carrying. It was truly over. She was safe, the danger had passed, and she could move forward with her life without looking over her shoulder. She decided to sell her uncle's house and mine. She had no desire to live in the place where her cousins had plotted her murder, and she did not need the money from the mine now that she had Warren's ranch and her teaching salary. The mine sold for a substantial sum to a mining company from San Francisco, and Lena put most of the money into a savings account at the bank, keeping some aside to buy books and supplies for the school and to make improvements to the ranch. Summer arrived in a blaze of wildflowers and blue skies, and Lena discovered she was pregnant. She told Warren one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, and the look of pure joy on his face made her laugh and cry at the same time. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, then knelt and pressed a kiss to her still flat stomach, making her laugh again. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby, a son or daughter to raise and love and teach." "I hope they have your eyes," Lena said, running her fingers through his hair, "and your kindness and your steady strength." "I hope they have your intelligence," Warren countered, "and your love of stories and your courage. They are going to be the luckiest child in California with you as their mother." Their son was born in late February of 1881, during a gentle snowfall that seemed like a blessing rather than a threat. They named him William Frederick Jameson, honoring Warren's father and Lena's uncle despite everything that had happened. He had Warren's eyes and Lena's dark hair, and from the moment she held him in her arms, Lena felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. Warren was a devoted father, getting up in the night to walk the floor with William when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, singing silly songs that made the baby coo and smile. Watching him with their son made Lena fall even more deeply in love with her husband, if such a thing were possible. When William was 6 months old, Lena went back to teaching part-time, bringing the baby with her to school. The children adored having an infant in the classroom and competed to help take care of him, and William seemed to thrive on all the attention. By the time he was a year old, he was a sunny-natured little boy who loved books and horses in equal measure. And Lena and Warren talked about having more children, about filling their home with life and laughter. Their daughter Emma was born 2 years after William, and then another son they named Samuel came along 2 years after that. The cabin became too small for their growing family, and they built a proper house on the ranch, a 2-story structure with a big kitchen, and enough bedrooms for everyone plus a study where Lena could work on her lessons, and Warren could handle the ranch books. The years passed in a blur of happiness, punctuated by the normal challenges of life. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick children and financial worries, disagreements and reconciliations. But through it all, the love between Lena and Warren only grew stronger, rooted deep in mutual respect and shared purpose and the memory of that snowy night when a cowboy had pulled a desperate woman from a blizzard and promised her safety. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Warren took Lena back to the spot where he had found her that long-ago night. It was summer now, and the ravine where she had fallen was lush with ferns and wildflowers instead of buried in snow. They stood together looking at the place where their story had truly begun, and Warren took both of Lena's hands in his. "You remember what I said to you that night?" he asked softly. "You said I was safe," Lena replied. "You told me to stop running." "And you did," Warren said. "You stopped running and you stayed with me, and you gave me the greatest gift of my life. You gave me love and family and a reason to wake up grateful every single morning. I want you to know that I would do it all again in a heartbeat. I would ride into that blizzard 1,000 times if I knew it would lead me to you." Lena reached up to touch his face, this man who had saved her and married her and loved her through a decade of joys and sorrows. "I ran into that storm thinking I was running toward my death," she said. "But I was actually running toward my life, toward you and everything we have built together. I love you, Warren Jameson. I loved you when I barely knew you, and I love you more now than I ever thought possible." They kissed there in the sunshine, in the place where their story had begun with cold and fear and danger. And then they walked hand in hand back to the house where their children waited, back to the life they had built together from trust and hope and a cowboy's promise in a blizzard. 20 years after that snowy night, Warren and Lena celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, their grandchildren, and the friends and community they had spent 3 decades building relationships with. Their oldest son, William, was a doctor who had returned to Downeyville to practice after medical school in San Francisco. Emma had followed in her mother's footsteps and taught at a school in the next valley over. Samuel had taken over the day-to-day running of the ranch and was proving to be as good a cattleman as his father. Lena had taught school for 25 years before finally retiring, and in that time she had educated hundreds of children and watched many of them grow up to become teachers, miners, ranchers, shopkeepers, and parents themselves. Miss Henderson had lived to see Lena's success, and had told her before she died that passing the school to Lena had been the best decision she ever made. Warren still worked the ranch, though he was slower now, his dark hair gone silver and his body bearing the marks of decades of hard physical labor. But his eyes were still the same sage green color they had been when he pulled Lena from the snow, and when he looked at his wife, they still held the same warmth and love that had been there from nearly the beginning. As the party wound down and their children and grandchildren departed, Lena and Warren sat together on the porch in the gathering dusk, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Lena leaned against Warren's shoulder and felt his arm come around her, solid and sure, and thought about the long, strange journey that had brought her to this moment. "You ever think about what your life would have been like if you had not found me that night?" she asked quietly. "If you had stayed in your cabin and let the storm pass without going out?" Warren was quiet for a moment, then shook his head. "No, because I think I was always meant to find you. I think everything in my life before that night was just preparation for the moment when I would hear you in the snow and ride out to bring you home. You are my home, Lena. You and our children and all the life we have built together. I would not change a single moment of it." Lena turned to kiss him softly, tasting 30 years of love and partnership in that simple touch. "I love you," she whispered. "Thank you for catching me when I was running. Thank you for telling me I was safe. Thank you for giving me the most beautiful life I could ever have imagined." "Thank you for staying," Warren replied, "for taking a chance on a cowboy you barely knew and building something extraordinary with him. You made me the luckiest man in California, Lena Jameson. You gave me everything that matters." They sat together as the stars wheeled overhead and the night wind sang through the pines. Two people who had found each other in a blizzard and built a love story that would echo through generations. Their children would tell their grandchildren about the night a desperate woman fled into a storm, and a cowboy rode out to save her, and those grandchildren would tell their own children, and the story would become part of family legend, passed down through the years as a testament to courage and kindness and the transformative power of love. But for Warren and Lena, sitting together in the peaceful darkness of their ranch, their story was not legend or myth. It was simply their life, the one they had chosen and fought for and cherished every single day. It was the home they had built from nothing more than trust and hope, and a promise made in a snowstorm. It was the family they had created, and the love that had sustained them through 3 decades of life's joys and sorrows. And as they rose and walked inside together, hands clasped as they had been on that long-ago night when Warren had pulled Lena onto his horse and carried her to safety, they knew with absolute certainty that they had found what every heart searches for: someone to share the journey with, someone to build a life alongside, someone to love completely and be loved by in return. The blizzard that had nearly killed Lena had instead given her everything worth living for. The cowboy who had told her she was safe had kept that promise every day for 30 years and would keep it until his last breath. And the love story that had begun with fear and flight had transformed into something beautiful and enduring, a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with simply choosing to trust, to hope, and to let yourself be caught when you are running through the storm.